Very nice work, Wayne. This whole orchestration has a wonderfully satisfying feeling to it. I mean, there's still a few things to fix and polish up and so on, but yeah, it just has this, just there's a lot of things that really just feel right about it. And there are a lot of decisions that you make in terms of proportion and color and drama and so on that really agree with my sense, right? So that's actually a little dangerous. In a way, one might say, okay, well, maybe Thomas is a little biased towards Wayne's interpretation, and that wouldn't be entirely untrue. And yet, there are there are definitely plenty of differences between the way that I approach my score and the way Wayne approaches his. So it'll be interesting to compare if you go back and look at my massive two-part lesson on my own interpretation of this. But it really just is, really hangs together well. And you did a great job, Wayne. So, our first question is, how could we possibly get your score ready for the stands, right? Because that is what this longa and the dotted longa sessions are going to all be about. Like, what, let's take these entries seriously. How could we get them much more ready to be performed? Not just have my sort of general feedback on this or that, but really, how could we really get it ready? So, with that in mind, I'm going to start with a few general words of advice here at the beginning, and then some specific words of advice about certain bars, certain features that I saw, and then I will go over it bar by bar, like just the way that I've done the other evaluations in this series, right? But let's do our sort of expanded evaluations to start off with, okay? All right, so the first thing is I would, a lot of people will have noticed this already, especially if they've been watching a lot of these videos. And they're getting more and more familiar with the material, for better or worse. I wonder if anybody's going to ever want to listen to this sonata again, but I know that I will. But you've left out several sections of accompaniment and harmonic support, okay, which I feel are really critical. I think that if you're going to take this wonderful approach here, which is, you are aiming for architectural perfection, right? And yet, if we jump forward to, say, bar 36, right over here, you are like leaving out certain things, right? Da 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 dum ba dum, right? Da 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 da. Then a chord and which doesn't resolve. You left out the resolution here, my friend, right? In pizzicato lower strings and in bassoons and horns and trombones and so on, right? Okay, and then let's see. Where's another one? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right here. You don't have anything supporting this at all, right? You just have yada da 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 da, right? But there should be something similar to this, bum bum, supporting this little ditty right here. Okay, and then let's see, middle of bar 52. So I took notes on this so that I just wouldn't forget. All right. So you left out. There's like one last little da 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 right here, right? And you left it out. Right. And I don't think you can do that because this pickup going into this section kicks off from that da da da, that last da da da, right? So you can't just stop here because this doesn't really lead forward with like if you just end up having the same little 2 beat gesture here twice, and it kind of just doesn't really do anything, right? So it's better to throw that in so you sort of hear it accompanied with a little bit of that rhythmic and harmonic support. And then we get serious with the crescendo, right? That's the whole point of that, because like here's where both hands come in for Beethoven, right? So you can't leave that out, I'm sorry to say. Maybe you just forgot. Okay, now let's jump forward to is it, hang on, let's go back up. All right, so we've got this same idea. Right, so we don't have that bum bum. We don't have that. We don't have those little guys resolving forward to the downbeat in either of these bars, right? So that needs to be put back in, I think, if you want to get this ready for a serious performance or a reading. Okay, now let's go back here. Now, I just want to say, like, right at the beginning, you make a real serious effort to indicate your entrances, right? Like, is this the first clarinet? Are you having a duet, and so on and so forth. And then, then you start to drop the ball a bit. And I mean, I can't imagine that you want everything to be a duet, like for pages and pages and pages and pages, right? We'll talk about the consequences of that later. But okay, so like even just saying like you're not just like setting it and forgetting it. We have situations here where you have intervals which are followed by single notes, right? Or so like here's an interval, there's single notes, right? So you're just definitely not being consistent or meticulously proofreading these parts. Okay, so that's what you absolutely have to do. You got to go back through this score, by golly. And the one way to do this is just to like go to the dynamic parts, which are a little off the screen with the way I've got it, and then just select the part and look through the part before it's been split off into separate parts, and then just like look at where you would really need to indicate whether it was first player, second player, a duet after intervals or whatever, right? Like what is what, especially on your entrances, right? Like just speaking of that whole issue, just like, do you really want a duet to go on very, very, for long periods of time? Do you always want to go to a duet all the time when you have single voices? Like here, this is four horns playing this sounding F below middle C, right? That is going to really, just really stand out with a lot of beefiness. Yeah, and then just like other places, I just kind of don't know what you intend. Would this be intended to be a duet, right? It seems to me like you're missing a lot of chances too, which we'll talk about in a second, to trade off between instruments when it just gets into a very, very long stretches of time. Okay, now same question of proofreading is you need to go over your string parts, and you need to really, really intensely proofread for divisi and unison, right? So you get it right at the beginning, right? You are more conscious of it. So we have these divises here, and I think, yeah, so here you say unison, right, and so on. So in unison here, but you then after that you're just not very consistent about it. And maybe like you were one of the later scores that I received, maybe you got into just a real kind of like last minute kind of rush. But this is my job now, right? My job is to help you get your score ready for the stands, right? So you gotta have to go through all of these parts if you want those string players to be ready for it, right? And look, even if you don't, right? Even if nobody in this longa category or the dotted longa category has any intention of going through the work of trying to have their these arrangements or orchestrations read or performed. Even if you don't have that intention, you should at least know, right? What is involved? What is the work involved? And then catalog that, categorize it, store it in the back of your brain, and then you know what to do when you got a serious project, right? Or maybe for the next orchestration challenge, which I think I really am going to have a checklist, right? And then I can just say, hey George, did you look at item 5 on the checklist, right? Or hey Wayne, did you look at item 12, right? Where I said to, really check out your, A2, number 2, number 1, wind or brass player kind of thing. Okay. Now, speaking of strings, we need a little bit of normalization between, in slurs between winds and strings, because they're not always uniform. You'll have some parts, and I know you try to more or less have them uniform, but there are still some places that I notice. Like, here you've got your first violin's really going da 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 da, and here you have the flute's going right? So like that difference in articulation style, it is not necessarily the greatest thing in the world, right? So there's it's that, and then do you really want incredibly long passages of strings to be all choppy? Like there's very little, like you really go light on your string slurring. Just as an observation here. I'm not seeing ta ta ta, and that's fine, but here like there's an inconsistency too, right? Here we have ta 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 ta, and here you have ta ta ta, right? So I can see the difference here because you want to be emphatic with but then ta ta ta. Wouldn't it be like, if you really wanted this to be emphatic, maybe you should have no slurs at all in this little part right here. Ta 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 ta, right? Or if you want to be consistent, maybe go ta ta, right? Okay. Now, speaking of long passages of semiquavers, you really do have really, really long stretches where you haven't indicated whether it's the first player or the second player. You're giving the conductor the idea that it's just like maybe you intended it to be like just the first player, in which case this is just a heck of a long time for your first flute player to go without a break. And then here the oboe is just going I almost started triple or double tonguing there, but yeah, the flute would be going tucka 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 tucka. So it's just a long stretch of time for a lot of these to be happening, and with your own, not to get on your case or make any value judgment, but with your own kind of carelessness here, with not marking a deux or 1 or 2, you have closed the door on whether or not you could trade off between people, right? So you could be trading off on some of these. You could have your first player start off this and then end on this note, and your second player pick up the same note, right? So this would be first voice and that would be second voice, right? And then just always dovetailing on the next chain, the next link in the chain, always the same duration of note, right? Don't have the note that is giving over to the next player, or don't have the player who's giving over to the next player have a longer note. That doesn't link the chain, right? Take it from Stravinsky. He's got the best advice on this. If the joining note in a pattern that's being dovetailed is an eighth note, then it should be an eighth note for both players. If it's a 16th note, it should be a 16th note for both players. Don't drag over, because then you get a note that drags into the next bunch of notes, right? So you can alternate between these players, right? Now you don't need to do that for the strings, because the strings are, they don't have those problems of breath or focus or tonguing. But then, when we get to stretches like this, you just have really, like this is particularly hard on your bassoons, right? Just you know, and if the conductor gets real excited and he starts conducting a little faster, you know, then like it's you know, it just becomes very hard on the player. Yeah. So yeah, so those are some things to think about, right? It just, you know, it's fatigue. And sometimes, like say with your oboists, right? Your oboists can actually have a huge amount of breath. Horn players too, but like oboists can have a huge amount of breath behind situations like this, and they end up with a lot of stale breath in their lungs. They need to expel the rest of their air and then breathe in again. So you might think, oh well, you know, oboists they can just, you know, since they have such pinpoint staccato and like they don't use up a ton of breath while they play, unlike the flutes, you know, they can just like keep playing forever. Yeah, they can keep playing forever on a pair of lungs that have stale air in them and they're ready to faint, right? Okay, what a way to go on stage, right? You know, I fainted in the middle of my concert and was carried out in a stretcher. Well, like you don't want those stories to become too epic and your name to be attached to the orchestration. Okay. All right. So, just a you know your flute scoring in terms of like where it's sitting in the sound picture is pretty good in general, but there are a couple of spots, right? Maybe just not thinking, or you know, um, let's jump ahead to this ending here. All right, so here you've got a place where you are interlocking octaves in flutes and octaves in oboes. So you know, it's a good idea if this were like say chamber winds, and you know everybody was playing piano and there wasn't a whole lot else going on. But there is a lot else going on. You have these bassoons, and we have the stuff in the strings, and so on and so forth. And I just really do not think that your second flute here can survive this enclosure that you've got right in here. It's these four octaves here. And then here, the second flute just basically has, you know, it has no strength here compared to everything else going on, playing against second oboe, the clarinet here, what's going on in the first violins, you know. And then a lot of these notes here are like doubled by notes in your first violins anyways, right? So wouldn't it be better to just have the thirds here played by, you know, the thirds that are formed by the top note of each of these octaves and oboes and flutes, just have them played by the flutes. And then have your oboes playing whatever intervals are left over at the bottom of the octaves, and you get a much more secure sound. And then here, just have a duet on top with your flutes and on the bottom with your oboes, right? And then just continuing forward from there, a duet is what I would say in this situation here. And I think that would work really, really well. A duet oboes, putting a lot of warmth behind the first violins here, and then the flutes above. A duet isn't always overdoing it, but you know. But then look, you have situations where like you have a three-note divisi in your or your first violins, and you have four players here, and you only have two notes supported. Why? Tell me why. Same thing here, right? Why? We have three notes here being played in your violins. Couldn't the second oboist be playing the G? Couldn't some of this be supported? But what about these? Well, I guess those sounding B flats are supported in the clarinets. But yeah. Anyways, so you see what I'm saying, right? You need to do a little bit more proofreading on some of this stuff. Okay. But our main focus here was enclosing second flute between two oboes, and that's just really not a very strong thing to do. It's better to stack flutes over oboes in this kind of configuration, right? And then there are a couple of sort of quandaries that you have given yourself here. We'll talk about those back here in the 60s. All right. So here we've got so we've got the the second flute doubling, I don't know, oboes or a duet oboes or single oboe or whatever. Now, here in this case, what you're really doing is strengthening the first violins. So, you have a lot of leeway. But if these oboes are going to be a duet anyways, it's better for you just to have a duet flutes above. Do you know what I'm saying? All right. Okay. But you could leave it the way it is. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just like your second flutist isn't really doing a whole lot. Now here, I would say absolutely have this duet, because it's the only way it's going to contribute anything. You're going all the way as low as A here. So in this case, I would say leave it in, but just be aware that it is inclusionary. Do you know what I'm saying? You're including the flutes in these notes that won't really be audible or really contribute much to the sound picture until they get up to around D, E flat, F, and so on, right? So just being aware of that, right? Now, of course, you could always you could always be going da 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 da, and then come in on F an octave higher, like with maybe octaves here, or just jump up an octave. Da 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 da. But then you mess up your whole scheme here. So, you don't need to do it. But okay. Now there's just a few other little, piddly things. You could be correcting stem directions, right? Just select the notes, type X, boom, right? There's another part, 36. I went a little too far there. Like, I think you could just select these bars and type X. Yeah. Right? There's some things where the stems are pointing the other direction because they were it was two-part writing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, and there's little things like this, right? This should be a half rest, right? Here, let me just... right, things like that. So, yeah, here's another stem pointing the wrong direction. All right, so just go through and try to correct little things like that if you're trying to get this ready for a reading or a performance or rehearsal or something, okay? All right, so now let's go over this. That is our general advice. Now let's talk about a few specific things in here in terms of different bars, and then I'll come back and I'll go bar by bar. All right, that will be I'll do section A and section B and so on. But let's just look at a few choice bars, a few things here that you need to work out. Okay, so here you do this lovely idea of a turn that is harmonized, right? The problem with it is that the harmonic note here, the note you're starting on the note above and dipping down and coming back up, right? Okay, the problem is that this turn is interpreting it as an E natural, right? And have you noticed when you play this back, there's this kind of in the mock-up, there's this kind of bite of dissonance right here. It just sounds kind of icky. That's because you have this E flat here, and then it's followed by an E natural here before we've gotten to this point here. Da 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 da. Here you could go to, you could correct that E flat, right? That E flat gets corrected to an E natural. Da 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 da. So anyway, there's just that's something that you're going to have to work out and figure out what you're going to do there. All right. Here, I would say, for the most part, your dynamics are pretty uniform, and that bodes well. You're scoring to the relative strength of the instruments and the texture, etc., etc. Okay, but right here, this is the one spot I thought was weak in that regard. You are assuming that your strings are going to go crescendo to mezzo forte, right? Now, I don't see a hidden mezzo forte here, right? So like you could actually, like if you didn't really specifically want to say mezzo forte, you could enter a mezzo forte here in Sibelius, and then you could hide it with there's a Shift Command or Control H, right? Right, and then it would be hidden there in the behind everything, but you would know that everybody would crescendo up to that point. All right, well, look, you should really mark it. If it's marked in these other parts, mezzo forte, dolce, and so on, right, then it should be marked here, right? So just like your strings need to know, they need to get as loud as your winds. I mean, for that matter, so do your bassoons and your your lower horns here, right? Now, let's jump ahead to 27. All right, so here we have a problem. In the piano part, we see a trill mark over over like a G fifth, right? And what that is intended to convey is that there's a trill on the D at the top, not that both pitches are trilling, right? Now here, it's a little weird. Generally speaking, unless there's a trill sign on both sides of an interval like this, the score reader would assume that it was just a trill on the top pitch, just like we see in the Beethoven Sonata for the on the piano part, right? The original piano score. So there's no need to trill on the root of that dominant chord. It's the 2 of 2, right? The 5 of 5. I'm getting all mixed up here. Sorry, still recovering from my surgery. So yeah, so it's like the 5 of 5, right? So so there really doesn't need to be a trill on the tonic note of that 5 of 5 chord, right? Just on the, because this goes, it goes D, C, right? And you do the little correction at the end of the, so D, C, da 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 dum, right? It's, so trilling on the tonic, G, C. It's just a little strange, you know what I mean? It's like maybe it would be better for it to be tremolo, right? On the tonic of that chord. Okay, yeah, and then just like a little bit here, this really felt like a bit of a cutoff. This is something I should really address more in looking at it bar by bar. But yeah, just like this big push, like you're getting more and more texture here, and then we have this big fortissimo boom, and then nothing. I don't feel that these instruments all by themselves are enough to really fill this hole, right? Maybe if you went fortissimo piano crescendo, right, on these pitches, right? Maybe that could fill this back up, right? But it just really feels empty here. Yeah, just anticlimactic is what I put in the notes. All right. Now let's jump ahead to 39. Yeah, so here's another thing where like you've got the lower strings and the bassoons going on together, and then suddenly, like when you go to the second ending, the dropout here just really feels naked, just is there any way to like maybe what if the lower strings went up to the middle of the bar and went diminuendo to pianissimo, right? So it just like it gradually sort of curves off the accompaniment to this first bassoon until finally it's just first bassoon, right? Rather than just joltingly stopping, right? I don't know. That's all up to you. That's just your taste. But I'm just telling you, the proportions that as they occur to me. All right. Now, there are some additional issues here. Okay, you've got a passage here where your oboes get higher and higher and higher till finally you are dancing around this high F with these, and I got to tell you, it's just really, this is not really very idiomatic for the oboe, right? So like F is a note that like it's if an oboe player has like a long smooth arcing kind of a phrase, and there are some high Fs in there and so on, then it's doubling the strings and and so on. So that kind of works, right? But this kind of thing is just really not for it's just and what's more, I don't know if this is supposed to be a duet or a single oboe player or what. Okay, but look, here's a radical suggestion. What if both of these parts were given to either flute, right? So you have one flute going ta 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 ta. They have plenty of time to recover their breath if they need to. Ta 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 ta, and so on, right? And then the one's going ta. The other flute player's going ta 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 ta, right? So I just think that works a whole lot better. Just keep all of this on flute, right? And then I think you have a way better chance here. But it just gets ridiculously high with these high Fs, I feel. Yeah, and then what so what are your oboes going to do? Well, just maybe have like maybe this could be first oboe on top here and first clarinet on the bottom, and then maybe they could sort of trade off after a few. Maybe you could have 2 bars of first players and 2 bars of second players and so on, right? So that you don't use up their breath either, right? All right, and then here at 87. We have kind of the same thing, quick cutoff. And it's weird that you have this diminuendo. It's sort of like the opposite. Shouldn't it be a push forwards to forte and then another push to fortissimo? It's just strange. It just feels like, before you even get to the ending, you sort of have the stuffing pulled out of the puppet, right? And then, and here we have the same thing, trilling on the, and very much a low trill, like having a low trill like this. It really just sounds like a bunch of in the sound picture. It just doesn't have the same kind of energy that you might think, right? I think low trills can be fascinating and they can be thrilling to hear in but when they're really exposed, like let's say you have your double basses playing a low trill and like the music around them is sort of ethereal, right? That can be something that's really an amazing thing. But like in a big in a big texture like this where everybody is kind of going nuts and you have these timpani rolling anyways, nobody's going to be able to hear any distinction between a trill and a tremolo, so you might as well have the tremolo, right? Okay, so there are a couple other things that occur to me here, which I did not put on the list, but I will type up and I'll put on the list, and then that will be at the end of this. The list will appear at the end of this entire video. Okay, when we go to the little thank yous and acknowledgments at the end. All right. Now, one is this. Okay, like these horns should be just say horns, right? In the middle, that should just be one thing. Okay, and the way that you do that is this. All right, just type I, and this comes up, right? And what you would want to do is first you would select your horns in F, and then you add an extra staff below, right? So now you have 2 horns in F A and 2 horns in FB, and that means that you'll just have this one thing floating in the middle, right? And you won't have F horns on both staves, right? You really want something to float between the brackets, or you want to have something floating behind the bracket, between the 2 staves that are bracketed, right? So that's one. Okay, and then the second thing that occurs to me is you've got this secunda volta thing. So yeah, by the way, just 2 2DA or 2NDA volta is this. You don't have to say only, just say volta, right? And then that will assign this. All right, but here's the thing. Let's drag this over here. Okay, I'm going to just change my screen slightly. And and we're going to select this note, right? So here's how you handle this. So you could actually select all these notes, all right, and then just go over here and then unclick where it says play on pass, right? So just unclick that button. And then this will only appear in the repeat, right? Okay. So that's how to deal with this when you have got a score in Sibelius. Now, let's go back to the beginning and evaluate this bar by bar. This is actually kind of the funnest, breeziest part. Although I will say that, like, having a list of little issues for you to fix is also very helpful to me. It kind of keeps the energy going and is a great way to start these videos because it, gets us more into a professional mindset, right? But now we're gonna talk about the actual scoring, and I have a set of evaluation criteria that goes with it, right? Which you saw at the beginning of this video, right? And we're gonna pretty much stick to that because that's sort of playing fair, right? All right. So starting off here, we've got this lovely first clarinet solo. You don't have to mark it as a solo, but it's like it's a featured line. And there's no need for you to mark this as mezzo piano, right? That is just, I mean, do you have the melody marked up one dynamic level anywhere else? Maybe you weren't getting the results that you needed here in the mock-up, but the actual truth is that when the player knows that they are carrying the melody, they will know it within a couple of notes, right? At rehearsal, and then they'll play it the right way from then on. They don't need the marking solo right. It's just a symphonic thing. So they will give it the amount of juice that it needs, and they will maintain the air of coolness, right? That comes with, with playing in the piano dynamic, right? So everybody out there, I've said this a few times before, but I want you to remember, okay, that piano is a universe, right? It's not a rung on a stepladder. So piano is a whole world of restraint, right? Now, pianissimo, that's like extra soft, and mezzo piano is like a sort of a moderated tone. It's, it's kind of it's more gray than it is, blue, right? Right? It's a moderated tone that helps to blend and helps a little teeny bit more energy in a couple of places, but really it is not the best color for the instrument. It is better to leave the instrument in the world of piano and allow them to make the right kind of nuances and stresses and anything else that it requires in order for their part to stand out, right? And if all else fails, you can just tell them at the rehearsal, listen, I just need more clarinet at the beginning, right? In which case, who knows what the conductor will do? Let's say, clarinets, can you write mezzo forte there? You just don't know. But in an ideal world, this should just be marked piano, right? Okay. All right. So, the thing about it is that the clarinet is just really going to get incorporated into the sound of the first violin. And if that was the reason for you marking it up to mezzo piano, so that you just wanted the first clarinet to stand out a little bit more and have it be more supported by the violins than otherwise, then I get it, right? I totally get it, what you are going for here. But it's still not going to be the best color on the instrument. The best color might be achieved by just letting the clarinet do its thing up here and having your string parts be subservient to it rather than doubling it, right? There's another issue here too, is that just watch out about slurring over notes that don't have a articulation that indicates portato or mezzo staccato or whatever, right? Just like slurring over two notes, it'll be that are repeated. It'll be sort of considered a kind of a mezzo portato, right? Like they'll kind of like, and they might even end up giving you something here that's more like a tie. And if it's going to be tied anyways, then just tie it, right? Right? So that's my suggestion there. If you just really want this to be super smooth, I would just say tie this. Right? Or you could just get rid of the slur and go, for your strings anyways, and go ta, like down, up, down, up, down, up, down. There's one other little thing here. Just because Beethoven has this one little F here that is written as an eighth note doesn't mean that you have to ignore what is clearly played by every pianist, and one of the reasons why I wanted you to listen to the Spencer Myer recording, right? What does he do? He leaves his thumb sitting on that F, and the top part of his hand goes ya-da-da-da-dum, with his fingers, but his thumb is holding this F, and he holds till the end of the gesture, right? So if that's holding, and there's no need for these, like what does the piano score say? It says quarter note with the fermata over it, so there's no need for that to stop either. I think that if you just have all of your elements, all the harmony and everything just holding on here, right? And you could even do something like this. You could have your first violins go B flat A, and then just hold the A, and have the clarinet go da 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 dum, and then you get the sounding C, and then the A, and then the F playing like a little triad here, and maybe you could even have the violas playing a C. Do you know what I'm saying? So you just have this. It would be nice if you just ended on this beautiful cushiony chord. And as far as it goes, it's really only like these players are not paying any attention to what's going on, and they don't need to worry about this, having a fermata on the second eighth note of this, because it doesn't matter to them. They're just going to be counting here when the conductor gives the preparation for the pickup beat here. They'll be counting from that point, so they don't really care about this. So just put the fermata on a quarter rest, right, for the whole bar. So you don't need to do this either. It's a very cool idea, but the only person who would possibly need it would be, say, if the first violins weren't playing at all, and then they suddenly came in here, then to see the fermata on that beat there and know that that's where the clarinet was holding it, then that would be more useful. But even there, it isn't needed, because the conductor is going to give the preparation after your caesura here, right? So I was tempted to put in something about the caesura in my extended evaluation notes, but I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's a little bit of overkill. I think all you need is like a pausa mark, right? Like what people call apostrophe or a comma, right? So it's the same symbol, and it just means to give a slight breath, right? And it's the same breath that the conductor is going to use in like cutting off. He'll cut off his clarinetists and violinists, and if you followed my advice, the entire string section, if they're holding through, if you change this. So he cuts it off and gives it just a tiny little bit of air, and then a slight preparation with his elbows, right? And then da 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 da. All right. So I would say, with all of that in mind, I think you set the intro sets the mood effectively. I almost would rather just have clarinet here, but like I do love the wonderful intense color of violin and clarinet mixed together. I think that's just especially like violins in a section being doubled by a clarinet, right? Okay. So with that in mind, I feel that checks the box for the intro, setting the mood effectively. So now let's go on. Does the melody start with elegance? Okay. All right. So here is another, here you're starting with first violins, and I feel that this is almost another reason for you to submerge the first violin part underneath the clarinets, because if the clarinet is the main soloist here and they're very audible and they are really taking over the melody here, then the violins coming in will be a fresh color, right? As opposed to just having a blend here and then having the violins come in with without the clarinet doubling, so now they're weaker, right, in timbre. All right, so I like the little slur on the pickup. I like the way that you didn't really essentially just copy the slurs or drop the slurs in from the piano scoring, right? if you've watched some of my other videos, you can hear me ranting about that at some other entrance, and that's all right. But it's really important to kind of work out a really good bowing scheme. So the way that you got it here, it actually does work. Up, down, up, down, up, down. It's nice. You've got the long up bow pushing into the crescendo. So this totally works. My solution was to go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. That way, I always ended up with a down bow on the downbeat, right? And I ended up with like a mixture. The mixture of tones happened here, and it didn't end up putting too much weight here at the bottom of the slur, right? And it's just, the shorter the bowing, the more control over nuance the string players have. Of course, like if they're very short, then it's gets to be a little choppy, right? I really like the way that you divided things up. I love the portato idea here. In both of these parts, I love the offbeat here, catching these Fs in the bassoons, right? And you could do worse than having a deux bassoons. The a deux bassoons here being doubled by other pitches, that's the key here, right? I feel that it covers a lot of of the kind of not quite as pleasant sound of unison bassoons. Yeah, and this like ta 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 That's great. Changing to the offbeats here in the bassoons while the cellos go into the onbeats. It's just really lovely ideas here that you've got, Wayne. Okay. Now, as far as the horns are concerned, I don't think there's any need for you to go a deux here. Like you have the weight of 3 horns on this one C, right? What if it were just what if this were just first and second horn, right? What if you had these 3 notes in first horn, right, with the crescendo, and then getting to mezzo forte here, and then first horn comes in over the top here, and then second horn plays these notes here, right? Or you could even have this be second horn, and this could be first horn coming in over the top, right? So those are all perfectly workable solutions. Now, you have to think that with your a deux idea, you have a deux horns and you have a deux clarinets, and they're both playing these 4 notes walking down. And what's going to happen here to our poor second violins, right? They're going to have this huge sonority behind them, right? Which is totally not matched in weight by the doubling of the flutes with the first violins, right? So I would say just ease up there. You just need a single clarinet. You need, just single horns here, right? And just have the first 2 players as much as you possibly can, right? Like those are the people who are in control. And I'll have more to say about like first and second versus first and third when we get here, which is something that Ravel does all over the place. Ravel was once asked, he was once asked if he would, by a publisher, Monsieur Ravel, could you please write us an orchestration manual? And he said, if I were to write a book about orchestration, it would be about all the mistakes I made. And that immediately gets people thinking, wow, what mistakes could Ravel possibly make? And I'm sure a lot of them would be his sense of proportion and aesthetics and everything else. But one thing that I would definitely say would be the way that he uses first and third all the time. Where in the place where first and second are actually much more attuned to each other. In like little places like this where it's just like questions of finessing intervals and so on. That's really a job for the first and the second. Of course, the first and the third can play it perfectly fine, but it's not really their roles, right? The relationship. It doesn't, that kind of scoring all the time with first and third, just managing little intervals and stuff. It doesn't really it doesn't play to the strength of most horn sections. Okay, and so here on all of these spots here, like where you just have two horns, and this very simple kinds of scoring and intervals and so on, that's really better left to first and second horn, right? Okay, so with all that said, does the melody start with elegance? I think it's beautiful. Is there a natural flow here to the accompaniment? Yes. Do you expand without clogging up? Yes. Is there a natural transition to octaves? Yes. And I really love the way that there's this little push right in here with the strings, and then you have da 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 coming in here with the winds and horns starting to support more. That's just such a lovely idea, Wayne. It's really great. But it's not going to. This is going to overwhelm the strings, right? I think it might be like considering like where you have your mezzo forte dolce come in and so on. Might be better to have the crescendo go up to the fourth beat, and that's where you go to mezzo forte, and then start the diminuendo on the downbeat, right? And then I think all of this will line up much better. Okay, so great work on that opening idea. Now let's check out the leggermente section. And okay, so this is piano dolce right here, right? In fact, you don't even need piano dolce here. I would say dolce may be on the anything that has a melodic component. But with this harmonic stuff, I would say just say piano, and then you could say dolce here, right? When things start to get more linear, right? But this shouldn't be piano dolce, should it, right? It's supposed to be piano leggermente, right? Or even like, of course, like this is the entrance of the oboe, so like they have to have the dynamic, or first oboist has to have the dynamic, but then leggermente, right? I mean, leggermente, Beethoven says, I want you to play this with lightness and delicacy in a sort of a virtuosic, sort of devil-may-care fashion, right? Why take that out? What's the point of taking that out? Is there something about that you don't want the oboists to, or the oboist to emulate, right? Put it back in. Da da da. Okay, and here, try not to go da. Go da ta. All right, so end the slur here, right? Because this is just like they will probably end up doing that anyways. But you be smarter, right? And if then this is going to have to be tongued, then you might want to tongue the ending of the little figure, right? Ta 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 ta. So you get the ta 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 or ta ta, right? And then, so this really checks a lot of boxes, right? Is there a contrast with the theme? Yes. Right. This was strings, and this was clarinet with strings. So now we have oboe as an element for the first time in this entire piece, right? Now the oboe makes their entrance, and then so does solo bassoon or featured line bassoon. I'm trying to be careful about saying solo. Then we have just the barest of little support here in your cellos and double basses. And here, if you had wanted to go A with your cellos, pizzicato, and then just directly to an arco, that's fine, because the player will just be holding the bow with the back of their hand while they pluck with their finger, right? They're going to be pluck, yada da. And so here we get into this, this area here. I mean, do you really want this to be down, up, 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 down? Do you really want this to be choppity, 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 choppity? I'm not saying that that's good or bad, but I mean, I'm just saying that like this is really are setting up everything to everything is separately articulated, right? So think about it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there is there's a bit of a lack of slurs, and maybe like just imagine like the difference between ta 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 ta. The difference between that and ta 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 ta, right? There's a certain grace there, right? So, So our next question here is, emphatic color of line, right? So here you've chosen to have clarinet. I would let's just assume this is A duet, and that's fine. So here's a problem. All right, exposed A duet pitches in clarinet. Here's the thing, is that they have a phased sound, right? Because the instruments they don't use fast vibrato, right? Fast or medium vibrato. Clarinets do have they can have a slight, like with a long tone, they can have a very, very slight variation of vibrato with the stomach. But that's just to keep the color from sounding too mechanical, right? But that is a different thing. Like when you say, oh, clarinets don't use vibrato at all, then like a clarinetist will jump in and say, well, I actually do use a really slow one sometimes, right? Okay, but in terms of like exposed playing, when you have like an exposed line on clarinet, that means that that's the only line, and it can be really heard in the orchestra. You hear the phasing that occurs from the lack of vibrato, right? Which you wouldn't hear in oboe or flute, right? Or strings, right? So when that quality of tone is accompanying the strings, then you get a really dense, intense tone, right? So yeah, I mean, you have the A duet flutes on top. That's fine too. So you just have to accept with this approach here, with not much strings in here, there isn't a lot of harmonic density, and also like no brass or anything. There isn't a lot of harmonic density setting up this color. So so you have this push here in it with a smaller architecture, and then suddenly you have a bunch of instruments coming in very softly, right? So I mean, does that really fit architecturally, right? Would it make more sense possibly to have a little bit more juice in here? Like maybe this line could be doubled in the strings, and there could be a little bit more going on here in the violas, right? Maybe there could be just a little touch of brass in here, maybe horns, right? Maybe horns and trombones, just like four voices, kind of setting things up very softly to go towards this. It wouldn't have to crescendo, right? So those are just some ideas. I love the idea of having the ba-da-da, just like a soft tutti, and then just winds and brass. Once again, I think there should be two horns, like the first and second horn. And then bum bum da da da. Yeah, like I think you're missing a possible, like in this particular configuration, C octaves here might be what what the masters would do, right? So C C C C C C as the bass trombone goes bum. And that way you can keep the two voices in there, right? And then you're not telling us whether this is the first or second player and so on. Bum, bum, bum. All right, so this is going to be very intense, the way you've scored it. Like, just like you have, like, both. I almost wish that this were back here, and you just had, like, a single line of strings here, right? But still, da-da-da-da-da, bum, bum. So it's just like here you've got 30 players playing this line, this very, very intense. All those players is in one line, and here you have divisi violists, right? Well, you support the divisi with horns and clarinets and so on. So I mean, you do compensate for it, but just I mean, it works, it balances, but so here I think that this could be played just as I was starting to lecture on before about Ravel. This could be played with first and second, and the players are perfectly fine playing out in this sort of exposed way. Well, it's not really exposed because it's doubling these other instruments, but still, there is a problem, okay? And that is, I just really feel that the horns are so powerful here. I think I did did I address this in my notes before? Yeah, it's just really, it's just the intensity here um, when the violins go to this delicate tracery, right? It's not so bad right here in this pickup, and then going into this bar here. That's all fine. But then when we drop down to here, did you notice in the mock-up, just like the horns were just being incredibly loud, like and the the you could barely hear the violins, right? And the mock-up is not being dishonest to you there. What if these pitches were like? What if you just ended your horns here, pianissimo, on eighth notes or quarter notes, right? Get rid of the tenuto. And what if this were all transferred up here to your clarinets and maybe anything else extraneous on bassoon, like we got this note covered by the bassoons. So yeah, so just transfer this over to the clarinets and end this with an eighth note or a quarter note pianissimo, and just see how much more stable that is then, right? In fact, this is the point at which, if you haven't done it already, you might want to get out a copy of your file, and then and just start adding my suggestions, and just maybe previewing them with the playback and seeing if they balance better and so on. The mock-ups aren't totally dishonest. I feel this is really nice. We've gotten to our B section I didn't even mention. But yeah, so it's a nice little way of accompanying. And now here, I think if you're going to da 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 in your upper winds, I think you can go to da 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 da. You can have the same slurring. I think that would work great. Because you can get the crispness from the bum 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 bum, right? You can get that from from your other instruments. So I mean, remember, like I mentioned before about pushing your oboes too high, and here you go up to a D, right? So it's not so bad, right? Da 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 da. You know what I mean? Just like, how many players do you have going on here? Do you have a duet flutes and a duet oboes? That is really going to overwhelm the sound of the violins here. Unless the violins were, say, mezzo piano or mezzo forte, and the flutes and oboes were piano, right? But you shouldn't, I think you should shy away from that kind of dynamic balancing. Maybe it would be better for you just to have a single player of each, right? And then you get that nice mixed sound, right? So far as that goes, there's nothing hugely wrong with this, right? You don't drive your flutes very low until you get to right in here, right? And this B is not going to be all that strong but you will have a duet flutes, and everybody's playing all together, and it's inclusionary and everything else. So it's not a huge crisis. Okay. So there's really the issues here, like to jump back to B. Having a fresh new color, well, we're strings again. We had strings here. We had a mixture of strings there. We had strings on this, right? So it's not really a fresh new color. Maybe the freshness could be the intensity of the strings, pushing forward to a sforzando, which they're going to interpret as like a very accented forte, right? And complementary timbre, all this doubling on your violas, that's going to be good. All right, now thinking ahead to the widening gap, right? It's nice. Like, you've got this, things do expand. I feel that that's good. Now, one thing that, like, I don't know if you played through the piano sonata or not, but you might have noticed that in the original left-hand chords, there's an alternating there's a chord that alternates where the middle note is a G double sharp, right? And then it alternates to, like, which is accented, and then it alternates to a G sharp. So I feel that is intended, that's where the accent is supposed to be. It's really, really on this G sharp, right? So the rest of I feel like the rest of the notes can just go, can go take a nap. It's really the that is important here, right? So that is something you could be bringing out with your horns. You could be going stopped, open, stopped, open, stopped, open. Just an idea. That's something that I did in my entry. So just but I mean, you're keeping it at piano, right? Piano accented notes. That's not so bad. I like the timpani part right in here. Right, and then you have this big push here. So yeah, and spreading the harmony out. So just like you do tick a lot of boxes here. So it just like, and then I have a big, I have one very important criterion, which is leaving a hole, right? So I feel just watch out. So fortissimo, piano, crescendo on a whole note, that wouldn't hurt, right? And like just especially if it just keeps everything out of the way, so you have this distinct color here, and then it flushes back in, and then you just end on your, on the new tonic, right? We have made our transition. Okay, and that takes us to the C part of this, and we're back to strings, so we don't have a new quality of tone, but at least you have divided up the slurs, more naturally. Da 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 da. You can get like a slightly more emphatic slurs on this just by slurring the beam groups. Da 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 da. And that, I think that gives the string players a little bit more control over the, just they can nuance the phrases a little bit better. Yeah, but it's nice. Piano dolce, right? I don't think that this is dolce, right? There's nothing sweet about these little bits and pieces, but yeah, piano dolce on the melodic elements, right? Yeah, and then this is really lovely. Now, there's never going to be a point in the existence of orchestral music where a mezzo forte triangle is going to be heard above forte winds, right? So if anything, like if you really wanted to balance it, you would mark the triangle fortissimo, right? And then you would actually hear it. But forte, I think, would be fine here. But don't mark it mezzo forte, though nobody will ever hear it. In fact, you can't hear it on the mock-up, and that's also pretty honest. This is really nice. This is all pretty standard of the One little issue that I would say is, what does Beethoven do? He goes da 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 on the first one, and then he jumps it an octave higher, da da da. So by having these two little chordal things being very very similar to one another, you drop your bassoons off the bottom and you change the clarinets a little bit, but the top of the chord is really the same, so there really isn't any change of drama. Do you know what I'm saying? There's no progression. This doesn't push forward to something higher and more intense, right? So you might want to drop this an octave and then go forward to this, right? So you can simplify this down to, maybe down to just oboes, clarinets, and bassoons, and then add the flute on top of this and have it higher the second time. Do you see what I'm saying? But there's no progression of drama here with the way that you've scored these in the same octave, for the top part. Okay, so yeah, you might want to mark this détaché, so just giving the players the kind of the permission to kind of use the center of the bow in a kind of a slightly bouncing stroke. Now that's what détaché. Détaché doesn't mean detached and like every note is to be played separately to warn the players that it isn't slurring, right? I mean, sometimes it can be used that if there really is there's an abrupt change and the players might think that it's supposed to be continue to be slurred, but I would actually not want to do that. I would save détaché for a situation like this, where you really want that speed and accuracy, and just you want it to be very regular without being mechanical, and that's what détaché gives you. So do you really want there to be no crescendo here? Or you just really want it to be abrupt? Not even the C sharp to be crescendo? Yeah. Da 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 da. Maybe a push here too, maybe? Alright. Yeah, and the da 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 da. Where's the resolution? Right, we talked about this, and there's no little mini cadence right here. Okay, and this is, once again, this could just be first and second horn. That's a good distribution of the pitches. It's nice. Yeah, so no big problems here. Yeah, that's all fine. And just trade off with your bassoons. Just I would say have every bassoonist take 2 beats, right? So first bassoon, trade off here, second bassoon, trade off there, first bassoon, second bassoon, and then maybe both bassoonists, or and then just go to the first bassoon there. Okay, and then this is a nice. That's a nice transition forwards, and then I already mentioned before, like maybe have your lower strings just sort of fade away, going up to the D flat, and then have just bassoon take over there, because it's just a really sudden jolt, the way that especially when you still have this, you have these elements, right? So you kind of almost want everything in the accompaniment strategy to kind of continue on, right? So. Just to make the transition a little smoother. All right, so if you've been watching some of my other evaluations, you'll know that this is where I jump back to the beginning and we remind ourselves of the way that A looked, right? What did we have here at A? We had the violins, and we had a little bit of bassoon in here, and we had these tricky little accompaniment strategies, and then the flutes and clarinets coming in, and we had the oboe sort of doing the little leggermente thing, put the leggermente back in, and then flute and clarinets and the first violins and so on, right? And then we ended up with this lovely little chorale, a soft tutti, and so on. And there wasn't very much of a setup of the following scope of harmony. All right, so just remember all that, right? Okay, so now we're going to jump ahead to E. And don't worry, we'll go back to, oops, I'm going a little too far. We will go back to, we'll go back to D and look at that last. All right, Wayne? All right, so here, we have really similar stuff happening, but lots of changes, right? So, so we've got bassoons kind of doing similar stuff to what they did before, but you've got the melody elevated up. Da 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 bum. You start off with this harmony here. Why couldn't the harmony keep going? Da 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 ba 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 bum. Nice little a harmony in there. It's really nicely conceived, and like the strings below, right, kind of staying out of the way. Yeah, there's a lot of similar elements here. Da, da, ba, 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 ba. We already talked about the poor second bassoon or second flute player right in here. Is this intended to be one player a duet, whatever? I would just really say try to stick to single instruments if you could here. I just think that that's better, right? Just keeps things much more delicate and more ethereal. There's a lovely little just touch of horns right in here. I think that works really nicely. Of course, you could be pushing, like the horns could be doing just like a pad here, and then not pushing with everybody else, making the push here more colorful by playing behind it harmonically, right? It's just one possible idea. Then, then we have clarinet taking over, answered by bassoon. Once again, just shorten the slur here. I think if you're going to go ta ta ta, then do the same thing at the beginning with your oboe, right? Just have it be, just do slurs by the beam group. And then this is very cool. Like here you are doing things at the beginning that you didn't at the, you were doing things here at the recapitulation that you didn't do at the beginning. So you're freshening the voices, right? So flute answered by bassoons, then clarinet answered by bassoon, then flute and clarinet answered by bassoon. And I think going to a duet is fine here because of the added intensity of all the strings playing together that will absorb the sound of the phasing in the clarinets, and having a duet and the flutes above will ensure that they won't be absorbed by the dense strings, right? So that's all great. Really, really nice scoring there. And, yeah. And then a duet bassoons here. That works great. And then like the pizzicato accompaniment and so on. This is all great. It's really, really nicely done. Okay. All right, so increased dynamic impact is our next criterion, right? So da 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 da. Yeah, so really nice. Just just going nuts here. The clarinets still a duet, which is a good thing, accompanying the seconds, and then we have all of the upper winds accompanying the first violins. It's just, and you're pushing forwards to a nice fortissimo. That's great. And you have each one separated. These are going to be nice long bows. That's what a tenuto mark gives you. It gives you sort of like there's a tendency to play tenuto notes on the piano as these sort of blocky separated notes, but that's not how it, for winds, it will be very long, intense notes that feel connected. Ta da da, right? But they're separately articulated, but they don't have any space in between them, right? Because it's the full length. And as far as strings are concerned, it's like very long, fast bows. Zoom, 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 right? Just think zoom when you see this, right? And yeah, bass drum, bong, bong, bong. Right. This is where you want for this kind of playing, you don't want that kind of Mozart, Don Giovanni, commendatory knocking at the door kind of bass drum. You want like a bigger, kind of boomier, more romantic bass drum, I think. Something that will really use the hall as a very big resonant kind of a sound. Yeah, and then it's nice. Okay. Yeah, and then just, here you have this sort of slightly disconnected. I don't know if you really need to have big separations here or these rests, but whatever. Okay. A nice roll of the timpani, and here we have a fortissimo, tutti with the basses and tuba up, right? That's all good, right? It's going to have a kind of a fat low end, but the low end won't be that low, right? That's really nice. Okay. And then horns or brass and pizzicato. That's very cool. So was this intended to be arco, pizzicato? Because that's sort of what it looks like it might be meant. I would say pizzicato sempre, right? So as to not confuse the issue. If you really want this to be continue to be pizzicato throughout the entire thing, just so that there's no, the conductor doesn't think, was that? All right, and then just all right, pencil work. Get out I want everybody to write arco over the forte bars with a slur, and then pizzicato over the you might find that the conductor just makes the decision for you because you didn't say sempre, right? Just do that to avoid confusion, I would say. All right, so there's a couple things I'm just going to quickly mention here when you've got two voices like this spreading out, like going from a duet to It's better to just have like to have like stems up on the first voice and stems down on the second voice. It's just better practice. Like things like this, anything that involves two voices going down to one voice in the same bar. It's just the best practice. Okay, but like for when you have two voices on every stem, then you can just keep it in first voice. That's all fine. It's just avoiding confusion. Yeah. Okay, so no big complaints there. Yeah, and then just like this development here, it's very sweet. And then arco. Bum, bum, bum. Now let's jump back to section B, right at the end here. We had strings. We had that doubled with, remember I was talking about the clarinets being better accompaniment here on this light tracery, right? Rather than the kind of horns up in a higher position. And the violas and so on. And then, we went on to here with I was warning you about, just like about maybe having a single player on each one. And with the single player on each one, you can like, you could go like first, could go all the way, like just give like every, like 2 bars each, right? So this could be the firsts up to here, and you don't need to have dovetailing notes. Just then go to seconds in each part, and then go to firsts, and then here I would say with the fortissimo, with the forte crescendo to fortissimo, then you could have like both players, right? Both sets of players. Yeah. So and then we had a bit of a gap here, and we had this crescendo and so on, and all right. So now let's jump ahead and see how you did the recapitulation of B in the E section. So this is so charming. Just this little first flute. And once again, I just like, this works. This is fine until you get to here, right? And you're just pushing your player up to E and then up to F, and it just really gets sky high, and it's just really, and I mean, like there's some oboists who can play this like it was nothing, but like you don't know that you're going to be getting a professional orchestra to read this for you, do you? Right? You might end up with a perfectly good university orchestra. I would split this up between your 2 players, right? Just like have this be played by your first flute player and this played by your second flute player, right? And it will work. You can put both. You can drop both of these onto the same thing, and then once again you could have these parts here split between the oboe and the clarinet, like, and just have like maybe the firsts do a couple of bars and the seconds do a couple of bars and so on, just like trade off back and forth, so you don't use up the player's lips. All right, and then just a lot of right in here, there's a lot of just single pitches in your horns, right? And just like very, there's like single pitches, and like, could some of this be kind of more chordal and so on? Like we got this beautiful chance to build and really spread the harmony out, right? And there's a chance to do that. Like here, you could go stopped, open, stopped, open, stopped, open, right? There's a bunch of things you could do here. Yeah, see, this perfectly. This is nicely put together, and I like the fact that you keep the upper strings out of it until later. I think that helps with some variety. But here with the crescendo, I think you can start bringing in more elements, right? Okay, and then just look, crescendo to forte, from there to fortissimo. I mean, that's what Beethoven wants, right? And maybe fortissimo piano, crescendo, back to forte here. I'm not convinced by this umpa rhythm here. Boom, tsh, boom, tsh, boom, tsh, boom, tsh. It's kind of fun. I mean, you leave it in, but it's, All right. So let's jump back to the C part, right? And remember what you did here. Strings. And then so on, right? And then trading off and going down to the bassoons. All right. Well, we remember that, right? Okay, so now Okay, now this could all be played by, played under single slur. That's totally fine. And clarinet, do-do-do-do-do-do, with a viola's beautiful idea. And good bowing divisions. Pluck, pluck. That's nice. Yeah, so here, like we have, here you've got like like you progress the harmony upwards an octave, but like you have some things in similar places, but it's all right. Is this intended to be? All right, so I'm just gonna take a look at my keypad. Yeah, so this isn't a tie, right? So if you want this to be two separately articulated notes in forte, make it portato, right? Like this, right? Right? That's better. All right. Same thing as that you did here. All right. You just forgot to put it in, I'm sure. Yeah. Bum bum bum. Yeah. Kind of cool. Strings. I would want doubling for this. You got clarinets here doing nothing, right? Can't they contribute a little bit to this? What if you did this? What if you had first clarinet playing down here, right? And then you had them dovetail to second, like to this being played in octaves and flutes. So dovetail to the second flute just on this C here, right? So just have the second clarinet trade off right on that note, and then go to octaves in your flutes there. Right? Yeah, and then I would have the second flute play this, and the first flute double the first violins here. Right? You don't want to not double your melodic notes. Like here you've got your violas being doubled by clarinet, right? Or clarinets. I'm not sure how many clarinets are intended to be here. But you don't want the top of this where it needs the most support and the strongest to not have any help at all, right? So yeah, so do that, right? So just go turn this into octaves when you get to here. Have up to here played by first clarinet, trading off to second flute here, is it where it turns into octaves. This should be played by second flute. This should be played by first flute, right, above it. And then same thing with the E, so this should be a C third at the end. Okay. And then here, that's kind of interesting that you come in and you have like a kind of a doubled tone here. I would definitely, these should all be like single instruments. And what I would recommend doing is dovetailing to second flute here. Right, and this should be first clarinet. And then yeah, and then trade off between your bassoons. Right, so first bassoon, trading off to second bassoon, trading off to first bassoon, or you could start with second and then go to the first, second, first, second, first, second, and so on. Yeah. So here you've got a situation where you're throwing in a little bit of doubling by other instruments, just so you keep a very, very strong, intense line here. Okay, so that's even at piano, right? So you have a very thick line. So that's all fine. Okay, I don't really see any huge problems here. I think that this is a little, so long as they're on the downbeat, they're okay. But yeah. Here I would like, here you're going to come in with clarinet, right? So this right in here, I would want this doubled by somebody, right? So you've got a this part right here could be played by first clarinet, and this part right here could be played by second clarinet, or vice versa. Right? And then, yeah, no big gripes here. Bum, bum, bum. I don't know. You know, I mean, if you like staccatos there, but what about accents instead? Or what about marcato marks? So it's like hammering. Bum, 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 bum. Right? Just a thought. So yeah, there are still a few other things here. I mean, this just, once again, I think you should try to reconceptualize a lot of what you do here in terms of like the way that you have a lot of instruments that just play a single voice a lot of the time when you should be spreading your harmony out, and other issues like that. But there's nothing like really wrong with the way that it is. It's just like you're going to have a lot of players sitting around bored or just constantly playing a duet all the time. Try not to do this, right? This is what should be happening. So yeah, just watch out. Proofread your slurs. All right, now let's jump back to D. Da, 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 da. What do I have in my evaluation criteria? More intimate, simple yet tender. So this was my notes to myself, and I really love I love, like, despite the fact that I'm complaining about this being sort of empty-ish, and me recommending to keep the lower strings in the game, maybe diminuendo up to the middle of the bar. Like, just have them end on D flat 16th note, diminuendo to pianissimo, right? Or maybe have the double bass stop here and the cello go up to the D flat, up to ending in pianissimo, so that you just have this little chuckling bassoon here at the end, right? Maybe that's another way around it. But that way it just keeps this from sounding so barren, right? Okay, but, we have our solo oboe again, right? Da, 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 da. So do you want portato here, which is this sort of kind of pulsing sound? Da, da, Do you want that in oboe too? Ta ta ta. You know what I mean? You might be missing out on an opportunity here to make things sound very, very, very cool. I would end the first here and then have this played by the second. Okay. Slurring into a tenuto is a little counterintuitive, right? And I would put I would do something more like this. Ta, all right, so pizzicato and then ta. I really love this in here, this unison. That's really lovely, very Brahmsian. Yeah, and it just really helps to keep the harmony together above. Da, da, da. I would make this articulate on the downbeat. What's wrong with having ending, going, like, having a place where you trade off to another thing, just ending with a nice ta rather than a right? Yeah, why not just end the slur before the bar? Yeah, and this is lovely. The flutes, just background harmony to the ta. You could have kept the flutes going till about right here, right? And then bum ba bum bum. Is this a duet in the flutes? I think that would work really, really great here, right? With the doubling the first violins. Da da da. And do you want this? Do you really want ta 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 and forte, right? Oh, there's one other thing too. Yeah. Do you want this to be soft? Right. Da yeah 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 yeah. Da 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 da. What? How does Spencer Myer play this? Go back and check it out. He plays this mezzo forte, right? Because he is setting this up. He's pushing you into the forte rather than like, oh, by the way, something important might be happening soon, right? I think this is like keeping it pianissimo. Like I don't know very many pianists who do that. This is usually played mezzo forte, right? Try that out. All right, so. Da, 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 da. Yeah, just that very, very nice and intense. And I like these horns here. They don't have to. It doesn't have to just be, Yeah, it doesn't have to just end there, right? Yeah, you fill in the harmony for the whole bar, I would say, with those horns. And then ba da 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 ba da 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 bom ba bom da 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 da. Yeah, so it's very very good that you are alternating, like changes of register imply changes of instruments. I ask in my evaluation criteria, and you absolutely do that. All right. There's really really nice collection of energy right in here. I think that a lot of this could just be done like this could be a single trumpet, right? Or you could be trying to have more harmony going on here. I mean, this is C to C sharp. That could be doubled with trumpets, or maybe first trumpet and first trombone or something like that. Just get a little, but you've got that here in the horn. Yeah, I mean, you're doing things right. I'm being a little too picky. Ta da da, ba ba bum, ta da da, ba da bum, ba da da, and everything's great until you get to here. Right? But ta da 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 da. Try to trade off between groups of between chairs here, right? Ta da 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 da, and then I would say trade off, like have these guys be the firsts, and then going to the seconds, and then going to the firsts and seconds and firsts, and and then maybe like you can give them 3 bars in a row or 2 bars in a row of like a duet, right? As you just start to push into this, and this is neat the way the flute comes in over the top. Yeah, and then the oboes and so on, just very very much climbing upwards. Ba 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 ba. And yeah, this is just glorious right in here, this massive stuff. But don't forget, what does Beethoven have? He has bar-long Cs, right? And not just in the bass. In fact, he's got this one bass note that is at the bottom, that is actually an octave higher than this, right? So you've got that, and then you don't have a whole note C practically anywhere else. Look, you've got 2 trombones here. Why don't you have one of them hold the C, right? Dun, dun. So you want to end in a C major triad, right? Not just on a G, right? That's what things end on, a C major triad in the right hand in the piano part, right? So I think you need to do a little rewriting here. So like you've got the C major triad here, but it's like the horns are all sitting on that G, and so are the winds, right? So you need to do a little rewriting here. The violas are not strong enough to hold to convey this idea here. You need to have like second trumpet. This is their moment, right? They should be holding this, right? Bum bum, and then here have a nice C triad in your horns and trumpets, right? Ba da 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 da. And here, I would give this a destination dynamic of pianissimo by the middle of the bar, so that you get the heck out of the way of these bassoons, or one bassoon maybe. Yeah, da 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 da. And who's this? Is this both? One bassoon, 2 bassoons? What's going on? You got to tell us, right? Okay, so anyways, I've been picking away at this and being picky, right? But that's my job. If you knew everything there was to know about orchestration, why would you need to enter the challenge? Although I will say that there have been a few entries that were from people who were pros, and they were just entering it just to enter it and have me talk about their piece, right? And some of them were just so out there. There was really nothing I could say about it. They were, they were just doing terrific stuff with it, right? So people who are doing professional work in the industry, right? But it was, that was a joy to look at. But I've got to say, it's just as much of a joy to look at a developing composer's score, because in fact it uses me in a better way, right? I can sit around and gawk at somebody's great work and say, oh wow, this was great and that was great and that works, and the reason why it works is this because of this, and of course you can learn a lot from that. But I feel like I'm at my best when I am helping people become better orchestrators, right? I just feel like that's really the reason why I'm here. And I love gawking at great work, and that's what my orchestration analysis series are about, which we'll be getting back to in a month or two. But as far as this is concerned, I think you did a great job here, Wayne. There's a lot more that you could be doing. Maybe you don't need as many brass instruments as you think. Maybe, if like there are so few times that your horns are going to be playing more than two pitches, maybe you only need two horns, right? Maybe you only need two horns, one trumpet, and a couple of trombones, and no tuba. Who knows? But I really like the scale of it. I like the color. I would actually rather you used more pitches rather than giving up instruments, right? That's where my head is at, because I think you're doing a fantastic job with the big, beautiful colors, the scope of your color and your sound picture and everything else. So, and I love the fact that you told me right at the beginning, 4 modern orchestral instruments, right? You told me right away. So yeah, I really like this a lot, Wayne, and I am so glad I finally had a chance to talk about it. I was so gutted when I got so sick that I couldn't, that I just couldn't, like I practically couldn't get out of bed. I was so sick. I would have like weeks where I just stayed in bed. And I'd do some writing, occasionally I would get out of bed for a few days out of the month, maybe 2 weeks or something like that, and I'd do some work on the channel, and maybe I made those Carmina Burana videos and some tips and some other things, but generally I was just really blasted out. And I mean, looking back on it, I actually did a lot of work over the past year and a half. I scored an indie film, and I reorchestrated, or I arranged a very long orchestral piece for concert band, or not for concert band, for a British style brass band, and a few other things. But wow, it was just like it's nothing compared to my regular pace of work, right? And all throughout that, I just did not feel that my brain was organized enough to sit down with scores like these and to be able to like cross-reference everything. So a lot of what a great coach should do is, like, that's my standard, is that you look at the score, you remember lots of tiny little details and how they relate to each other, and how the relationship of those problems or inspirations or whatever, how can you build on those strengths? How can you address those issues, right? And that is really why it took me so long to get to the point where I would find a treatment that worked, where I would be much more alert and would really be relating things to one another mentally. So that is the reason for the delay, and the reason why I'm suddenly able to do this 2 years later. And boy, am I glad that I had a chance to look at your score, Wayne. I was just really thrilled. And it's just getting more and more exciting as we get closer and closer to the end of these. There's going to be about another month or so of these evaluations. There's going to be this is the Tuesday one for this week, and then there's going to be a Thursday one, then a Saturday one. That's Enrique's, and another video coming on the Sunday. And that's also when the sale is going to close on my books. So if you haven't gotten it yet, I made it go past everybody's payday for November, right? So anyways, so it'll end on the first Monday of November. So anyways, I hope to see everybody through, who's been hanging out. I hope that you guys keep up with this series, because I sure am getting excited by it, and I'm so happy that you guys have kept views. There's been a few hundred of you just really following along and being faithful to it and leaving comments, and that's what you should do under this very, very worthy entry. And Wayne, if you have some time, please make some comments on your fellow Longa entries, like on some of these other ones, and I'm sure we would love to hear what you have to say. And thanks again for sending this in to me and for being so patient with me while I tried to get my brain back together. See everybody in a couple of days.